what do you think is happening right now on the streets? Do you think people are finally rising up and finally seeing the agenda?
Yes, I personally do. And I can see, I can feel it, I can smell it in the air that it's happening more and more as ordinary people starts to rise up and defending their own principles.
Yes.
Okay, it's a matter of I think I pretty much agree that it all boils down to one's own principle. Okay, and these principles based on the upbringing, their beliefs, and so on. Okay, which strengthens and fortifies their personality. Okay, and it's also part of the integrity not only onto oneself
Exactly.
but also the integrity as part of the community, because
Yes.
a community is not a community without these people who uphold certain principles. A teacher ought to behave like a teacher. Okay,
Yes.
a doctor ought to behave like a doctor, healing people. you know so these are basic principles, the very fundamentals of the construction of a society.
Well, when
Because
you talk
if we
about,
don't rise
yeah.
up and defend our own basic principles as
Hmm.
part of the integral part of our own society, we have no society. It will crumble.
Well, it's a little bit deeper than that. It's not just a matter of your own personal principles and your own personal thought. It's about your action.
Right.
It's about your actions. And I want to
Sure.
remind our listeners to the protests against the Nazis within Germany,
Right.
and
Right.
how they went. Now,
Hmm.
during the war, the only actual recognizable protest movement was called the Rose Society,
Hmm.
which was
Hmm.
done by a group of university students, and I believe it was in Bavaria,
Right.
and it was led by a girl. She was 18, and her brother, who was 19, and they were first and second year university students in 1943. Now,
Right.
what they did is they handed out pamphlets. Because you see, in a society that's been infiltrated and that's been totally
Hmm.
controlled by agitation and propaganda and wedge issues, as we've discussed, the key to maintaining control is control over the media. And
Right.
in other words, if you don't know what's going on, you're no better than a cow being led to the slaughterhouse. But
Right.
what they had done, the Rose Society, is printed pamphlets, and they'd
Hmm.
left them at random on the floor all over the University of Heidelberg, I believe it was,
Hmm.
or it could have been Munich. Anyway, the point is that they were disseminating the truth, and
Sure.
as soon as you start doing that, well, by whatever means you have available, because remember, if they've taken over the TV, then you have
Right.
to go for the pamphlet. And
Right.
if they're running around arresting people for putting anything on telephone poles because you're spreading hate, well then you'll have to go to social media, or you'll have to wear T-shirts, or you'll have to do something. But the point is you've got to communicate. That communication is the secret here. You have to
Sure.
build up a consensus of opinion, or at least a consensus of information, so people understand what's going on. Now, and
Right.
the thing that really bothers me is, as you know, we've had massive protests against LGBTQ Queer Week at schools
Right.
and at buildings, Ministry of Education buildings, all over this country.
Right.
But you didn't see a single broadcast of that on our local media or newspapers or on the 6 o'clock news.
Right.
But why is that? Was that not newsworthy? Of course it was, but it didn't
Hmm.
conform to their agenda, and their agenda was gay pride, and anyone who stands against that is somehow full of hate, and somehow
Right.
a less than human person. Okay. Now, doesn't
Yep.
that remind you of something? Doesn't that remind you of this dehumanization? That you're not a good parent. You're not a good
Hmm.
citizen because you're spreading
Hmm.
hate. Well, that's called fascism. Because anyone who stands against your political point of view has to be degraded, dehumanized, reduced, and that's a part of a process.
Hmm.
And the end part of that process is exclusion,
That's
imprisonment,
right.
and eventually extermination.
Yep.
Okay? And I don't see any difference between what's going on in this country and what went on in Nazi Germany throughout the 30s and then accelerating into the 40s. I don't see any difference. I see
Right.
people being branded as radicals just for standing up to defend their children from
Hmm.
indoctrination and you know and that what happened in Germany? Oh, the Hitler Youth.
Right.
And what were they taught to do? Inform on their parents.
Hmm.
My mommy and daddy are against me and my transition.
Hmm.
Well, they're going to have to be arrested because they hate their children. And in the words of our great leader, they're unkind. Don't you see it? Don't you see the agenda? Where did they get this
Yes.
from? They got this from historical situations which we brand as crimes against humanity.
Right.
And we know that. And it's happening against our children. So why can't we see it again? History has repeated itself and we're blind.
That's right.
Now there have been protests. Can you tell me about some of them?
You mean in schools?
Anywhere.
Canadian schools?
I heard
Well,
you know more than me about some protests. I think there was some in an Ontario school where
yeah,
the
Ontario
student. Yeah.
schools. I think Calgary's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the most recent one I share with you
Yep.
is from Calgary.
Yep.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, bits and pieces.
Is it a coincidence that it would
Yep.
happen in a province that had just declared independence from fascist control and elected a counter fascist leader in Danielle Smith? Is that a coincidence?
Yes.
I don't think so. I think.
Not necessarily coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
but it's in the making. Let's just say that.
Right. It's in the making.
Right. It's in the making.
Are we going to be able to stand in front of our schools and protect our children? Oh, I heard there was this law just enacted where you can't stand within 100 meters of a school because you're a dangerous terrorist spreading hate.
Well, that was that was imposed by the most recent Calgary mayor.
Interesting.
I,
Who's now been voted, or hopefully will be voted out of office.
well,
Well, look what happened in Nazi Germany. First, they made certain newspapers illegal. Then they
that's right.
started canceling all organizations that were not sponsored by the government. For example, community groups, church
Right.
organizations.
Sure.
Eventually, all Catholic and Protestant church groups, which were not authorized, were not allowed to meet.
Right.
What's the next thing they did? Oh yeah, all youth groups were now party youth groups. So you had the Hitler Youth for both girls and
That's right.
boys. Total
Yep.
control of society and total control of your children. So that now their minds are not from you; their minds are from them.
That's right.
And that's been done before, and that's what they're trying to do now. And
Sure.
I just can't believe it. I can't believe that people are not basically marching down the street every day, and I can't believe that they're still delivering their children to school every day. What's going
You
on
talk.
here?
You talking about Canadian West Coast? Oh
Yes,
yeah.
yes, right here in our hometown.
It's the sickest part of Canada. Dare me say, dare me say
Yes, it is
that.
sick, and that is but supposed to be educated. It's supposed to be full of liberal values. And remember, liberalism is supposed to be human rights. It's supposed to be individual choice. It's supposed to be what
Oh,
happens in the.
liberalism has been hijacked for many, 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 many decades.
Uh huh.
Okay, it's been deeply infiltrated with ideals and indoctrinated by things like socialism.
Because liberalism is supposed to be you have the freedom to do whatever you want, and the government doesn't have its nose in your bedroom, okay? and it
That's
doesn't
right.
interfere with the way you want to raise your kids.
That's
That's
right.
supposed to be liberalism, but now it's turned into everything you do. It can be interpreted ideologically as hate or oppression,
Hmm.
or you're somehow a bad parent because you don't allow your kids to become indoctrinated by a school system that's now under the control of the government. And
Sure.
I think that this is so far from liberalism, it's not even funny. And what it really is
Right.
fascism. It's fascism with a capital F,
That's
and
right.
it's no coincidence that some of the politicians actually have ties to
Yep.
a group in Davos, Switzerland, called the WEF, which the president of which, Klaus Schwab, is the son of a Nazi fascist whose company used slave labor in World War II.
Well, don't you ever forget that our so-called deputy PM currently in
Yes,
charge of the Liberal government,
yes,
her granddaddy was a Nazi too.
yes. I think her name starts with free and ends with land, and I
Right.
believe that
Freedom Land. There you
yes,
go.
yes.
Freedom Land.
Oh, is that anything like the
Okay.
sign over Auschwitz that said "Work will make you free"? And
Oh
by the
yeah.
way, the person you're referring to and the grandfather you're referring to was a minor functionary in the Polish government, which was a
Mm,
Nazi puppet government. And I believe her
right.
grandfather was one of those newspaper publishing. He was in the information news business at that time.
You bet. Yeah.
In other words, it's part of propaganda.
Sure.
So he was a propagandist. And what's her job? Minister of Finance. Well, I don't see her doing any
Mhm.
finance. I see her doing nonstop propaganda. That's all she
Well, I
does.
think I think I think she did.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that she's doing it against the typical Canadians' will.
Uh-huh. Well,
It's
when you
slowly,
yeah.
slowly but surely, they're trying hard to destroy our country.
Well, when you
That's
grab
the way I see it.
when you're so-called finance minister that grabs the purse strings of a nation in order to redirect your the money to fringe groups that do nothing but support agendas that cause disharmony in our society, I guess that's what the plan was. Make a finance minister who's not interested in the welfare of the country financially, but in diverting our hard-earned tax dollars to fringe groups who are here to destroy us.
That's right.
Well, I don't call that finance.
Mhm.
I call that agitation propaganda, and that's how far we've stooped and how low we are. And this is particularly disgusting to me because I myself was in the military, and both of my grandparents fought for this country in two world wars, and things were a little bit different in those days. It was more like black and white, true,
Right.
because we didn't have any traitors in our midst. Traitors in
That's
our
right.
midst were called spies and saboteurs, and they were shot.
That's right.
But now we have these people who are in positions of power within our own society. How did this happen? Where did it start? How can it be allowed?
Well,
How blind were we? And what are we going to do about it?
we definitely have to wake up.
And what's the next step? If we do wake up, are
Well, we start making a lot of noise and see how they respond. Of course, there
uh-huh,
are actions to follow, but
right?
we have been conditioned and become sheeps for
Mm-hmm.
many, many decades, okay? Our
Yes.
educational systems have been taught and trained us
Yes.
generations after generations to become mindless followers,
Right.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
That would not even dare asking a simple question
Mm-hmm.
as with the three-letter word
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
WHY.
And is it because our
Okay,
governments must be doing what's in our best interests, and how dare we question that?
that's right. Or even
Mm-hmm.
more,
Mm-hmm.
they never question anything. So that's why these days, the fearless,
Mm-hmm.
the bold and fearless evil city councilors, provincial officers, and so on would try to impose things that are against the humanity, things that are against the community, against
Yes.
the ideals, all on us, just because we never rise up and to challenge them, even with something as fundamental as asking the question, why?
Precisely. Stop.
Right.